Today live February 23, 2021 World News Headlines. Donald Trump reveals his biggest regret for his daughter Ivanka. New York grand jury votes not to indict police officers for Daniel Prude death. Wife of Mexican drug kingpin El Chapo held in jail on U.S. charges of helping him run cartel. Trump may soon have to answer rape allegations under oath. Prosecutors say re-examining Ohio store robberies linked to killing of Da'Shawn Tye. FBI warning of potential Capitol violence did not reach top security officials, they say. Beat poet Lawrence Ferlinghetti dies at age 101. Colorado City to establish independent police monitor in wake of Elijah McClain's death. Former NYPD officer charged in January 6 attack on Capitol Police. Fauci says he sees U.S. CDC relaxing some COVID-19 guidelines soon, CNN. Historic U.S. Interior pick tests Senate support for Biden on climate. U.S. Treasury No. 2 nominee Adeyemo urges get tough attitude on China. Exclusive. Senators revive bill to combat Chinese censorship of U.S. companies. Trudeau welcomes sorely missed U.S. leadership in Biden meeting. Exclusive. Perfect trips. Venezuela ships jet fuel to Iran in exchange for gasoline, sources say. Italy repatriates ambassador and bodyguard killed in Congo. Israel sharing some COVID vaccines with Palestinians. Honduras, Czech Republic. Trump offered North Korea's Kim a ride home on Air Force One. Donald Trump reveals his biggest regret for his daughter Ivanka. Now forced to disclose his tax returns to justice, Donald Trump has revealed that he would have liked to appoint 3 of his children to head the U.S. Supreme Court. Donald Trump gave an interview to the Fox News television channel on Monday, February 22. The opportunity for the former U.S. president to share one of his greatest regrets. Indeed, if he could go back, the former Republican Party figure would nominate 3 of his children to the United States Supreme Court. According to him, Ivanka, Donald Jr. and Eric would be much better judges than the 3 clowns he chose to appoint at the top of the U.S. judiciary. As a reminder, Donald Trump himself decided to propel Neil Gorsuch, in April 2017, Brett Kavanaugh, in October 2018, and Amy Coney Barrett, in October 2020, on the front of the stage by offering them the status of associate judges. The former head of state said they are the worst people who have never worked for him. And that includes Scaramucci, he added, hacking his former White House communications director, who had backed Joe Biden during his presidential campaign. The ex-president also referred to the fact that the court case allowed a New York prosecutor to obtain the right to request a copy of his tax returns. None of these 3 morons even called to ask me what to do. No gratitude, he lamented, saying the laws had to be changed. Documents requested by the Manhattan District Attorney. For the small explanation, Donald Trump's accountants will have to submit his tax and banking declarations, made for 8 years. The opportunity for American justice to find out whether or not there was tax fraud, insurance fraud or bank fraud. Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance Jr. has been asking for the former president's tax and bank returns for months. New York grand jury votes not to indict police officers for Daniel Prude death. New York, a grand jury in New York State voted not to indict police officers for the death of Daniel Prude, a black man who died of asphyxiation while in police custody in March 2020 in the city of Rochester, State Attorney General Letitia James said on Tuesday. Prude's family obtained body-worn camera footage of Prude's death that showed him naked in a dark, snowy street. A so-called mesh spit hood was placed over his head after he told officers he had contracted the novel coronavirus. The video also shows Prude, apparently in the middle of a mental health crisis, being restrained against the ground by police. The footage was released in September, further fueling ongoing nationwide protests against police violence following other high-profile episodes in 2020 where police killed black men and women, including the death of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police in May. The trial of Derek Chauvin, a former police officer seen kneeling in videos on Floyd's neck for more than 8 minutes, begins in Minneapolis on March 8. James said her office had hoped to secure indictments in the death of Prude, a 41-year-old father of 5 children who lived in Chicago. I know that the Prude family, the Rochester community and communities across the country will rightfully be disappointed this outcome, James said at a news conference in Rochester, a city in upstate New York. Citing the court-enforced secrecy surrounding grand jury proceedings, James declined to say what charges her office had presented to jurors. A lawyer for Prude's family and the Rochester mayor's office did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Prude had visited his brother and ran out of the house in the middle of the night, prompting the brother to call the police, concerned for Prude's mental health and reporting that he had taken PCP, an illegal drug. Police officers found Prude naked, approached him with a stun gun and told him to put his hands behind his back so they could handcuff him, which Prude did, according to a report by James' office. Less than 10 minutes later, he stopped breathing. Efforts to revive him foundered in the ambulance, and he was taken off life support a week later. An autopsy found he died of asphyxiation following the restraining holds used by police and excited delirium, a complex syndrome that can be triggered by recreational drug use. Soon after the video emerged last September, Rochester Mayor Lovely Warren fired Police Chief Lerone Singletary. 7 police officers involved in the arrest were suspended. Their lawyers told local media they had followed their police training appropriately. Singletary's successor, Police Chief Cynthia Harriott Sullivan, said in a statement her department would respect the jury's decision and that it would continue to reform the way its officers respond to mental illness. "My heart goes out to the Prude family during this difficult time," her statement said. "The officers involved remain suspended while an internal investigation continues," she said. Donna Lieberman, executive director of the New York Civil Liberties Union, criticized the grand jury for choosing impunity, not accountability. "The Rochester Police Department took Daniel Prude's life while he was in crisis," Lieberman said in a statement. "He deserves services and supports, not for his life to end." James, the Attorney General, also made new recommendations for how cities respond to mental health crises on Tuesday, urging that emergency personnel be trained in recognizing the symptoms of excited delirium syndrome. Wife of Mexican drug kingpin El Chapo held in jail on U.S. charges of helping him run cartel. Washington, a U.S. judge on Tuesday ordered Emma Coronel Ashpuro, the wife of Mexican drug kingpin Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, to be detained on charges she conspired with her husband to run a multi-billion-dollar drug enterprise while he was behind bars. The arrest of Coronel, 31, at Dulles International Airport near Washington on Monday was the highest-profile U.S. capture of a Mexican on drug charges since former Defense Minister Salvador Cienfuegos was detained in October. Coronel worked closely with the command and control structure of the Mexican drug trafficking organization known as the Sinaloa Cartel, most notably with her husband, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the leader of the cartel, prosecutor Anthony Nardozzi said at a federal court hearing. The defendant has access to criminal associates who are members of the Sinaloa cartel, as well as financial means to generate a serious risk of flight, he added. Coronel is being held at an Alexandria, Virginia, jail and her lawyers are expected to apply for bail. She has not yet entered a plea. Coronel, a dual U.S.-Mexico citizen, met Guzman when she was a young beauty queen and married him in 2007 at age 18. The couple has twin daughters. In 2019, Coronel launched a clothing brand in the United States and she also appeared in a U.S. reality show about mafia families. Prosecutors said Coronel grew up understanding the drug business and the reach of the Sinaloa cartel. Authorities said Coronel relayed messages to help Guzman conduct drug trafficking from 2012 to early 2014, and continued delivering messages while visiting him in a Mexican prison following his February 2014 arrest. They also said Coronel conspired in Guzman's famous July 2015 escape from the Altiplano prison in Mexico through a mile-long tunnel dug from his cell, and began plotting another escape following his January 2016 capture by Mexican authorities. Guzman, 63, was convicted in February 2019 in a high-profile Brooklyn trial for trafficking tons of cocaine, heroin, marijuana, and methamphetamine into the United States over 2 decades. He was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years, and locked up in the federal Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado. Coronel was a regular presence at her husband's trial. Mexico's president said on Tuesday that Coronel's arrest was a U.S. matter, but he hoped the U.S. government would share more information. Joint efforts to fight drug trafficking were strained after Cienfuegos' arrest, with Mexico's government moving to restrict U.S. agents' activities in Mexico in retaliation for what it called a breach of trust. The U.S. Department of Justice unexpectedly dropped the Cienfuegos case and let him return to Mexico. Mexico dropped its own case against him in January. A Justice Department official said the case against Coronel is part of a long history of pursuing drug traffickers, and not reflective of a new push by the Biden administration. Coronel was charged with conspiring with her husband to distribute heroin, cocaine, marijuana, and methamphetamine for unlawful importation into the United States. If convicted on all charges, Coronel faces up to life in prison and a potential $10 million fine. Trump may soon have to answer rape allegations under oath. During a December visit to New York City, writer E. Jean Carroll says she went shopping with a fashion consultant to find the best outfit for one of the most important days of her life, when she'll sit face-to-face with the man she accuses of raping her decades ago, former President Donald Trump. The author and journalist hopes that day will come this year. Her lawyers are seeking to depose Trump in a defamation lawsuit that Carol filed against the former president in November 2019 after he denied her accusation that he raped her at a Manhattan department store in the mid-1990s. Trump said he never knew Carol and accused her of lying to sell her new book, adding, "She's not my type." She plans to be there if Trump is deposed. "I am living for the moment to walk into that room to sit across the table from him," Carol told Reuters in an interview. "I think of it every day." Carol, 77, a former Elle magazine columnist, seeks unspecified damages in her lawsuit and a retraction of Trump's statements. It is one of 2 defamation cases involving sexual misconduct allegations against Trump that could move forward faster now that he has left the presidency. While in office, Trump's lawyers delayed the case in part by arguing that the pressing duties of his office made responding to civil lawsuits impossible. "The only barrier to proceeding with the civil suits was that he's the president," said Jennifer Rogers, a former federal prosecutor and now an adjunct professor of clinical law at the New York University School of Law. "I think there will be a sense among the judges that it's time to get a move on in these cases," said Roberta Kaplan, Carol's attorney. An attorney for Trump and another representative of the former president did not respond to requests for comment. Trump faces a similar defamation lawsuit from Summer Zervos, a former contestant on his reality television show The Apprentice. In 2016, Zervos accused Trump of sexual misconduct, saying that he kissed her against her will at a 2007 meeting in New York and later groped her at a California hotel as the two met to discuss job opportunities. Trump denied the allegations and called Zervos a liar, prompting her to sue him for defamation in 2017, seeking damages and a retraction. Trump tried unsuccessfully to have the case dismissed, arguing that, as president, he was immune from suits filed in state courts. His lawyers appealed to the New York Court of Appeals, which is still considering the case. Zervos filed a motion in early February asking the court to resume the case now that Trump's no longer president. Zervos and Carol are among more than 24 women who have publicly accused Trump of sexual misconduct that they say occurred in the years before he became president. Other accusers include a former model who claims Trump sexually assaulted her at the 1997 U.S. Open tennis tournament, a former Miss Universe pageant contestant who said Trump groped her in 2006, and a reporter who alleges Trump forcibly kissed her without her consent in 2005 at his Mar-a-Lago resort. Trump has denied the allegations and called them politically motivated. In September, after several unsuccessful attempts by Trump's lawyers to get Carol's case dismissed or delayed, U.S. Justice Department officials under his administration took the unusual step of asking that the government be substituted for Trump as the defendant in the case. Justice Department lawyers argued that Trump, like any typical government employee, is entitled under federal law to immunity from civil lawsuits when performing his job. They argued that he was acting in his capacity as president when he said Carol was lying. Legal experts said it was unprecedented for the Justice Department to defend a president for conduct before he took office. When Judge Lewis Kaplan of the Federal District Court in Manhattan rejected that argument, the Justice Department appealed. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit has yet to rule on it. It's yet to be seen whether Justice Department officials under President Joe Biden, who took office last month, will continue to defend the case on Trump's behalf. The White House and the Justice Department declined to comment. If the appeals court upholds Judge Kaplan's decision, it would likely clear the way for Trump to be deposed by Carol's lawyers. Unidentified male DNA. Carol's lawyers are also seeking a DNA sample from Trump. Carol says she still has the dress she was wearing when Trump allegedly attacked her. "I hung it in my closet," she said. Carol said she randomly crossed paths with Trump in the Bergdorf Goodman store in the mid-1990s. Carol, who hosted a TV talk show at the time, said Trump recognized her. "The two chatted," she said. Trump asked her to pick out a gift for an unidentified woman, and they eventually ended up in the lingerie department. After asking her to try on a bodysuit, Trump closed the door in a dressing room, pinned her against a wall, unzipped his pants and sexually assaulted her, according to the complaint. Carol said she told 2 friends about the alleged attack shortly after it happened, but did not report Trump to police, fearing retribution from the wealthy and well-connected businessman. Decades later, Carol went public with her story in a June 2019 New York Magazine article, adapted from a new book, What Do We Need Men For? A Modest Proposal. She said she was inspired to recount the incident by the #MeToo movement, which emboldened women to share their experiences of sexual assault and harassment. In photos shot for that story, Kaplan, at the request of the magazine's photography director, wore the same black Donna Karan dress that she said she had worn on the day that Trump allegedly assaulted her. When Carol filed her lawsuit later in 2019, her lawyer, Kaplan, had a guard escort her to retrieve the dress from her closet for forensic testing. An analysis concluded no semen was found on the dress, but the DNA of an unidentified male was detected on the shoulder and sleeves, according to the January 8, 2020 lab report, which was reviewed by Reuters. If the dress does contain traces of Trump's DNA, it would not prove his guilt. But a match could be used as evidence that he had contact with the dress and to help disprove his claims that he never met Carol, according to two forensic experts not involved in the case. How his DNA got on that dress would be the argument, said Monty Miller, a biochemist who runs a DNA analysis consultancy and previously worked at the Texas Department of Public Safety's State Crime Laboratory. It's for the attorneys and the courts and everybody else to argue about why it's there and how it got there. Carol said she's confident the DNA on the dress belongs to Trump and wants her day in court. She said she now sleeps with a gun next to her bed because she has received death threats since publicly accusing Trump. This defamation suit is not about me, said Carol, who meets regularly with other women who have accused Trump of sexual misconduct. It's about every woman who can't speak up. This story refiles to fix Carol name reference in 6th paragraph from bottom. Prosecutors say re-examining Ohio store robberies linked to killing of Da'Shawn Tye. Prosecutors investigating the shooting death in Ohio of an unarmed black man by a white store owner are re-examining two earlier robberies they had linked to the dead man, in a case his family once investigated as a federal civil rights violation. Hamilton County Prosecutor Joseph DeTers announced in December that no charges would be filed against the store owner who shot Da'Shawn Tye, 19, after concluding that Tye was attempting to rob the store for a third time, and that the owner feared for his life. Tye's family contends there is no evidence their son acted improperly on November 19 or that he was the robber at the Mage's Grocery in Cincinnati on August 8 and November 14. No weapon was found on or near Tye, according to the family's attorney Fanon Rucker. In January, Rucker asked the U.S. Department of Justice to open a civil rights investigation into the case. The chief assistant prosecutor of the Hamilton County Prosecutor's Office, Mark Piepmeyer, told Reuters he has asked the Cincinnati police to reinvestigate the earlier robberies. I asked the Cincinnati Police Department to do a complete investigation of the earlier robberies as if Tye had lived and we were going to prosecute him for those robberies, Piepmeyer said in an email on Monday. This is being done to satisfy his family that he had done the earlier robberies and that is why the store owner was justifiably in fear when Tye appeared on the day of the fatal shooting. Tye's family says their son is not depicted in the two still images of the earlier incidents shown to them by Cincinnati homicide detectives. Prosecutors have refused to release those images to the Tye family's lawyers or the public, citing the ongoing investigation. The store owner, Michael Mages, 60, has referred questions to his attorney, Aaron Moore. In an email, Moore refused to comment while there is pending or the potential for investigation or litigation. The Justice Department has acknowledged receiving the family's request for a probe, but has not commented further. FBI warning of potential Capitol violence did not reach top security officials, they say. Washington, an FBI warning that a protest by Donald Trump supporters could turn violent reached the U.S. Capitol Police the day before the deadly assault, but top officials in charge of securing Congress that day did not see it, they told lawmakers on Tuesday. The officials told two Senate panels looking into failures ahead of the January 6 attack that the intelligence they received did not prepare them for hundreds of Trump backers, many working in teams and wearing tactical gear, storming the building. They gave conflicting accounts of conversations ahead of the assault on whether to call in National Guard support and what, if any, role concerns about keeping up the appearance of an open Capitol building played in the security failure. One of the four, former Capitol Police Chief Stephen Sund, told senators that he did not see a bulletin issued by the FBI's Norfolk, Virginia office on January 5 warning law enforcement agencies that extremists were preparing to commit violence. None of the intelligence we received predicted what actually occurred, Sund said, referring to scenes in which Trump supporters assaulted police, smashed windows and charged through the Capitol chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." We properly planned for a mass demonstration with possible violence, Sund said. What we got was a military-style coordinated assault on my officers and a violent takeover of the Capitol building. The attack was an attempt to stop Congress, with former Vice President Pence present, from certifying Democratic President Joe Biden's electoral victory over Republican Trump, who falsely claimed the election had been marred by widespread fraud. The former sergeants-at-arms of the House of Representatives and Senate, Paul Irving and Michael Stenger, also testified on Tuesday, saying they did not see the FBI warning. All three resigned in the wake of the violence, which shook the world, threatened a peaceful transition of power and endangered the lives of lawmakers and Pence, prompting former President Trump's second impeachment trial. Worries about optics. The Capitol building, which hosts the 535 members of Congress, has long been open to visitors and guests in a way that the White House has not been in decades. Passers-by could walk almost to the building steps, and prior to the COVID-19 pandemic it was still open to tourists, who had to enter through a special visitor's entrance. Sun said he had requested National Guard troops be deployed at the Capitol in a conversation with Irving and Stenger 2 days before the riot, but that Irving had expressed concern about optics of using the troops. Irving, however, said he did not remember the discussion as a request, and flatly denied he had been concerned about appearances. "We did discuss whether the intelligence warranted having troops at the Capitol. The collective judgment at that time was no, the intelligence did not warrant that," Irving told the committees. Sun and Irving also gave conflicting accounts of their communication on the chaotic day of the attack. Sun said he had called Irving at 1:09 p.m. to ask for National Guard troops as members of the mob were fighting with Capitol Police at the steel crowd control barriers outside the building. Irving said he had no record of a call then. "There seems to be some confusion about the basic facts and who asked for what, when," observed Republican Senator Josh Hawley. Senators asked for phone records. Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police rushed to the scene after Sun requested their help at 12:58 p.m., the city's acting police chief Robert Conti told senators. His forces helped the Capitol Police control the mob and eventually clear the Capitol so that lawmakers could return to certify Biden's victory. But Conti said he was shocked by an interagency call about 2:22 p.m., when he heard Sun pleading with Pentagon officials for National Guard to be deployed. Army officials were reluctant, expressing concerns about how it would look, Conti said, adding, "I was stunned at that response." The first members of the National Guard did not appear on the Capitol grounds until 5:40 p.m., Sun said. U.S. media reports said that congressional leaders and security officials had not wanted to see the same militarized presence around the Capitol that was stationed about the White House during summer anti-racism protests. Scores of police were assaulted in the melee, with over 140 Capitol Police and some 65 Metropolitan Police injured. More than 200 people have been charged so far for their roles in the riot, including some with ties to far-right fringe groups such as the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys. Senators next week plan to call witnesses from the FBI, the Department of Defense and the Department of Homeland Security. Democratic Senator Gary Peters said the incident revealed clear gaps in intelligence around domestic extremists. The federal government must start taking these online threats seriously to ensure they don't cross into real-world violence. Beat poet Lawrence Ferlinghetti dies at age 101. Poet and publisher Lawrence Ferlinghetti, whose City Lights bookstore in San Francisco became a West Coast literary haven for Beat generation writers like Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg, has died at the age of 101, City Lights said on Tuesday. Ferlinghetti, who played a key role in a free speech battle after he published Ginsberg's poem Hell in 1956, passed away on Monday evening, said City Lights Books on Twitter, adding, "We love you, Lawrence." When Ferlinghetti turned 100 on March 24, 2019, San Francisco officials declared it Lawrence Ferlinghetti Day. City Lights threw a party, although the honoree did not attend due to failing eyesight and trouble in getting around. The publishing house Doubleday released Ferlinghetti's Little Boy, an experimental novel with autobiographical touches told in a stream of consciousness style, in conjunction with his 100th birthday. The Beat generation first percolated in New York in the 1950s, but Kerouac, Ginsberg, William S. Burroughs and a slew of other writers, artists, hipsters, activists and thrill-seekers would eventually wander west to 261 Columbus Avenue in San Francisco's North Beach neighborhood to hang out at City Lights. "I keep telling people I wasn't a member of the original Beat generation," Ferlinghetti told the Los Angeles Times in 2005. "I was sort of guy tending the store." In 1957, Ferlinghetti, a former Eagle Scout, found himself on the front line of a constitutional fight when he was arrested after publishing and selling Ginsberg's groundbreaking Howl and other poems. While it was considered an epic achievement by Beat peers, Howl shocked much of America with its references to drugs and homosexuality and renunciation of mainstream society. Ferlinghetti was cleared of obscenity charges when a judge ruled Howl was not obscene because it had redeeming social value. "It put us on the map courtesy of the San Francisco Police Department," Ferlinghetti said. "It's hard to get that kind of publicity." Ferlinghetti and Peter D. Martin, a sociology student at the time, had founded City Lights as a bookstore and small publisher in 1953, naming it for Charlie Chaplin's 1931 movie. In a few years it became a bohemian mecca for intellectuals, writers, dissidents, activists, musicians and artists. City Lights became about the only place around where you could go in, sit down and read books without being pestered to buy something, Ferlingetti said in a 2006 Hartford Courant interview. "Also, I had this idea that a bookstore should be a center of intellectual activity. Ferlinghetti's works often showed an anti-establishment or political bent. He wanted his poems to be accessible to all. The poem should have a public surface, by which I mean anybody who hasn't had any education could still understand the poem, he told Writer's Digest in a 2010 interview. Then below that it should have a subjective or subversive level, which would make the poem more important than just a surface lyric that's just giving you a nice picture. In his biography Lawrence Ferlinghetti, Poet at Large, Larry Smith wrote that his subject's writing sings with the sad and comic music of the streets. The most successful of Ferlinghetti's many works was the 1958 poetry collection A Coney Island of the Mind, which sold more than 1 million copies. Described by the New York Times as among the most popular poets of the modern era, he published poetry through 2012 and in 2015 put out Writing Across the Landscape, Travel Journals, a collection of his writings spanning more than 50 years. In 2017 a collection titled Ferlinghetti's Greatest Poems was released. Ferlinghetti was born in Yonkers, New York, a few months after his father died. His mother suffered from mental illness, so he went to live with a relative in France and later with another family in New York. He earned a journalism degree at the University of North Carolina, served in the Navy during World War II, serving on a submarine chasing ship during the D-Day invasion, and received a doctorate in literature from the Sorbonne. During his Navy service, Ferlinghetti toured Nagasaki 6 weeks after it was hit with a U.S. atomic bomb. He told the San Francisco Chronicle that in the rubble he found a teacup with what appeared to be human flesh melted on it. In that instant, I became a total pacifist, he said. In addition to Ginsberg, Kerouac, and Burroughs, Ferlinghetti published works by beat figures such as Neil Cassady, Gary Snyder, Gregory Corso, and Philip LaMancha, as well as Sam Shepard and Charles Bukowski. When asked how he remained prolific and lived to 100, he told NPR, "Have a good laugh and you'll live longer." Ferlinghetti, who also was a painter, had 2 children. Colorado City to establish independent police monitor in wake of Elijah McClain's death. Denver, U.S. officials in a Colorado City where a young black man died in police custody in 2019 say their system of accountability failed. The acknowledgement on Tuesday came a day after an independent panel hired by Aurora's City Council found that police stopped Elijah McClain even though they had no apparent reason to suspect a crime was being committed, and that a subsequent internal police investigation of the incident was flawed. The 23-year-old went into cardiac arrest soon after an officer put him in a chokehold as he cried and pleaded for him to stop. "We've identified the root of this case and it's the failure of a system of accountability," said City Manager Jim Twombly, referring to McClain's death. "I will be pursuing with the mayor and city council the establishment of an independent monitor to enhance accountability and transparency of the police department and regain the trust of the public," he added. Twombly did not elaborate on the proposal for an independent monitor. McClain family attorney Mari Newman told Reuters by telephone that the devil is in the details with respect to the creation of an independent monitor. "Without the authority to actually make and enforce changes, it's a symbolic gesture," she said. No officers involved in McClain's death have been disciplined. Initial internal probes determined that the officers and paramedics involved in McClain's death had not violated policy. The district attorney declined to file charges in the case. Aurora Police Chief Vanessa Wilson said she knows McClain's death has spurred anger and pain, saying the bottom line is that Elijah McClain should still be alive today. She vowed that the police department will address our failures and build trust. According to the 153-page report released Monday, an Aurora police officer decided in less than 10 seconds after McClain was stopped as he was walking alone late on August 24, 2019 to turn what may have been a consensual encounter with Mr. McClain into an investigatory stop without apparent grounds. After the arrest, police called paramedics, who administered a dose of ketamine, a sedative. McClain died days later in hospital. The independent investigators concluded that paramedics failed to properly examine McClain before injecting the sedative. Former NYPD officer charged in January 6 attack on Capitol Police. New York, a former New York City police officer has been charged with using an aluminum pole to attack a U.S. Capitol officer during the January 6 assault on the Capitol building by supporters of former President Donald Trump. Thomas Webster, 54, was ordered detained by U.S. Magistrate Judge Andrew Krause at an initial appearance in White Plains, New York. Webster, who is also a former Marine, surrendered to authorities in New York's Hudson Valley on Monday, after the FBI had sought the public's help in finding him. A federal prosecutor said the married father of 3 was seen captured on video at the Capitol where he assaulted a police officer with the pole in his bare hands, ripped off the officer's protective gear, and shouted obscenities. These videos shocked the conscience, Assistant U.S. Attorney Benjamin John Forte said, adding that there had been a look of pure rage on the defendant's face. His teeth were gritted. Webster's lawyer argued that the defendant had gone to Washington merely to protest. Krause agreed that Webster was not a flight risk, but said he would pose a danger to the community if released. As a judge, I certainly have the utmost respect for people's constitutional rights to protest and to speak out in whatever way they see fit, Krause said. But what we see in this video goes well beyond First Amendment speech and moves into criminal activity. More than 200 people have been charged for their roles in the Capitol riot, which left 5 people dead and caused members of Congress to flee. The assault followed a speech by then-Republican President Trump to his supporters where he challenged the results of the 2020 presidential election, which Democrat Joe Biden won. Fauci says he sees U.S. CDC relaxing some COVID-19 guidelines soon, CNN. Washington top U.S. infectious disease official Anthony Fauci on Tuesday told CNN that he expects the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to soon relax some COVID-19 recommendations aimed at curbing its spread for people who have been vaccinated. I believe you're going to be hearing more of the recommendations of how you can relax the stringency of some of the things, particularly when you're dealing with something like your own personal family. When people have been vaccinated, Fauci said, adding he expected the new guidance pretty soon. Historic U.S. Interior pick tests Senate support for Biden on climate. Washington, Deb Haaland, the first Native American ever picked for a U.S. cabinet post, pledged on Tuesday to oversee the country's vast public lands and waters in line with President Joe Biden's climate priorities, and was grilled by Republican senators who want an Interior Secretary more welcoming of oil and gas drilling on federal lands. If confirmed to lead the Department of the Interior, the Democratic Congresswoman from New Mexico would oversee more than 500 million acres of federal and tribal lands, accounting for about a fifth of the nation's land surface, as well as offshore federal waters. It is President Biden's agenda, not my own agenda, that I would be moving forward, she said at the contentious confirmation hearing that reflected deep divisions over some of Biden's climate-focused executive orders. These include a pause on new oil and gas leasing on federal acreage, currently the source of around a quarter of U.S. production. Republicans have been battling Biden's sweeping plan to combat global warming and expand renewable energy sources like wind and solar power. But most Democrats on the panel applauded Biden's focus on climate, a U-turn from former President Donald Trump's policy. Trump emphasized oil, gas and coal production on federal lands over the fight against climate change. Republicans on the Senate Energy Committee pressed Haaland on Biden's pause on new federal drilling leases. They also challenged her past statements against oil and gas production and her presence at the protest against the Dakota Access Pipeline led by the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. Louisiana Senator Bill Cassidy asked Haaland if she had a prejudice against fossil fuels. Prejudice on fossil fuels perhaps isn't the way I would describe it, Haaland said. I would say that President Biden is moving toward the tremendous opportunities we have in diversifying our energy. Haaland, a Laguna Pueblo tribal citizen, said her own economic struggles as a single mother who relied on food stamps made her well attuned to the job and economic security concerns raised by senators from energy-producing states. Republicans and some Democrats from those states are concerned that drilling restrictions or other measures to curtail fossil fuels development would cost them jobs and revenues. She assured her critics that she recognizes that fossil fuels will continue to play a major role in America and that revenues fund critical services in states. New Mexico Democratic Senator Martin Heinrich, who introduced Haaland, said she has a track record of working across the aisle. He called her a true partner for states like ours as we diversify our economy, invest in our communities and remain a global leader in producing and exporting energy. She noted that the administration's temporary pause on new leasing does not apply to drilling and other operations by existing leaseholders. Republican Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski called Haaland's nomination very significant but raised concerns about the impact of Biden's executive orders on her state's resource-based economy. She said Interior has an outsized influence over Alaska, 60% of which is owned by the federal government. Alaska Republican Congressman Don Young, who joined Heinrich in introducing Haaland, said despite their disagreements over carbon fuels she is able to listen and work across the aisle. He urged the Senate to vote for her because she will do a good job. She will work for us. Haaland pointed to the historic nature of her appointment both at the Interior Department and in American history. If an indigenous woman from humble beginnings can be confirmed as Secretary of the Interior, our country holds promise for everyone, she said. U.S. Treasury No. 2 nominee Adeyemo urges get tough attitude on China. Washington, Wally Adeyemo, President Joe Biden's nominee as Deputy Treasury Secretary, on Tuesday said Washington should work with allies to hold China accountable to international rules to ensure a level playing field for companies in the United States and elsewhere. China is our top strategic competitor, Adeyemo told a confirmation hearing before the Senate Finance Committee. Where China is not willing to play on a level playing field, it's important that we hold them accountable in the international system, Adeyemo said, adding that taking such action with other countries would better demonstrate to the Chinese that they're isolated when they violate the rules. Echoing comments from other Biden officials, Adeyemo struck a hardline tone on Beijing, vowing to fight what he called unfair economic practices in China and elsewhere, while working to rectify economic inequality at home. If confirmed as Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen's deputy, Adeyemo, 39, would play a key role in shaping U.S. economic policy on issues ranging from financial regulation to relief for everyday Americans and U.S. sanctions on foreign governments. A former senior advisor at asset manager BlackRock Incorporated and the child of Nigerian immigrants, Adeyemo would be the first black deputy secretary of the Treasury. He served as a top national security and economic advisor to Democratic President Barack Obama and held senior jobs at the Treasury. Adeyemo underscored the importance of sanctions as a policy tool, and said Yellen had asked him to conduct a top-to-bottom review of U.S. sanctions policy, if confirmed. Treasury's tools must play a role in responding to authoritarian governments that seek to subvert our democratic institutions, combating unfair economic practices in China and elsewhere, and detecting and eliminating terrorist organizations that seek to do us harm, he told the committee. Treasury oversees a host of sanctioning tools, including a ban on U.S. investment in alleged Chinese military companies that was introduced by former President Donald Trump. The ban, which has prompted market confusion since being unveiled late last year, takes effect in November, and investors are eager to learn if Biden will revoke it or clarify its scope and use it to go after top Chinese firms. Adeyemo, drawing on his experience coordinating international economic policy in the Obama White House, said the United States needed a holistic approach on China that factored in national security. We can't separate the economic from the pure security, we have to look at it all because that's the way the Chinese look at these issues, he told the committee. Adeyemo also called for targeted investments in critical U.S. industries and technologies, and policies to protect workers and companies from anti-competitive trade practices, signaling a hardline stance on trade issues. The pandemic had exposed critical vulnerabilities in the U.S. supply chain for medical supplies and drugs that needed to be addressed, but the federal government should also review how those threats can morph going into the future, Adeyemo said. He defended Biden's $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief plan, and dodged questions about concerns that its passage could trigger inflation. Adeyemo also backed Biden's plans to raise corporate tax rates, and said he would work with international partners to end a race to the bottom in corporate taxation. Finance Committee Chairman Ron Wyden, a Democrat, and other members of the committee lauded Adeyemo's qualifications. Republican Senator Chuck Grassley said he expected Adeyemo to be confirmed in the job. Exclusive. Senators revive bill to combat Chinese censorship of U.S. companies. Washington, a bipartisan group of U.S. senators will revive legislation as soon as Wednesday to counter Chinese censorship in the United States, a new effort by Congress to hold Beijing accountable for its growing efforts to stifle criticism beyond its borders, Senator Jeff Merkley told Reuters. U.S. officials have complained that the Chinese government has increasingly sought to suppress opposition to its ruling Communist Party by coercing U.S. companies, from hotel chains and airlines to Hollywood film producers, to take pro-Beijing stances. We must monitor and address the impacts of China's censorship and intimidation of Americans and our companies, so we can create a strategy to safeguard this bedrock freedom and hold those accountable who suppress and destroy it, Merkley, a Democrat leading the effort who will soon be chair of the Congressional Executive Commission on China, said in emailed comments. The bill is co-sponsored by Republicans Marco Rubio and John Cornyn, as well as Democrat Elizabeth Warren. A similar bill was introduced in 2019, but stalled. The new censorship bill would direct the president to set up an interagency task force under the National Security Council to monitor and address China's censorship or intimidation of Americans and U.S. companies. It would mandate a report with recommendations for industries in which freedom of expression issues are particularly acute, including the media and film industries, according to a copy of the proposed legislation seen by Reuters. The censorship bill is among a barrage of legislation to confront China, as deeply divided Democrats and Republicans in Congress find common ground opposing Beijing. U.S. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said on Tuesday he had directed lawmakers to craft a package of measures to counter China's rise. Former U.S. Attorney General William Barr said last year that Hollywood companies routinely caved to pressure and censored their films to appease China, which last year overtook the United States as the world's largest film market. Entertainment companies did not respond to Barr's allegations at the time. National Basketball Association games were taken off the air in China for a year in 2019 following a tweet from a Houston Rockets manager backing Hong Kong democracy protests. In 2018, the Chinese government compelled global airlines and hotel chains to change their online references to Taiwan to imply the self-ruled democratic island is part of China. Some seek stronger response. A Democratic Senate aide involved with the bill said drafters recognized it was a sensitive issue for companies and did not want to make bad guys out of victims of economic coercion. We want to help provide focus in the U.S. government to address this problem, the aide said. In a certain sense, we are trying to help insulate companies from pressure rather than raise the temperature further. Some in Congress argue that a task force approach is not sufficient and call for a stronger response, such as making it easier for U.S. employees to sue if fired based on pressure from China, or requiring U.S. universities to disclose financial ties to Confucius Institutes, which are Chinese government-backed cultural centers. American allies have also warned of Chinese censorship playing out at home. Germany said on Tuesday that China had tried to intimidate Hong Kong residents living in the country since pro-democracy protests broke out in the city 2 years ago. President Joe Biden, who has voiced concern about China's coercive and unfair trade practices, and endorsed a Trump administration determination that China has committed genocide in its Xinjiang region, has signaled his administration will maintain pressure on Beijing. Trudeau welcomes sorely missed U.S. leadership in Biden meeting. Washington, Ottawa. U.S. President Joe Biden and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau sought on Tuesday to turn the page on the Trump era, stressing the country's deep ties and pledging to work together on COVID-19 and climate change in their first bilateral meeting. The United States has no closer friend than Canada, Biden told Trudeau via an electronic video link with the Canadian leader and top aides. That's why you were my first call as president and my first bilateral meeting, he said. The two leaders' robust agenda would address the COVID-19 pandemic, economic recovery, climate change, refugees and migration, fighting for democratic values around the globe and strengthening democracies at home, Biden said. Trudeau welcomed the Biden administration, citing in particular Washington's renewed attention to climate change in contrast to former U.S. President Donald Trump. Thank you again for stepping up in such a big way on tackling climate change. U.S. leadership has been sorely missed over the past years, the Canadian leader said. Canada has often been a U.S. president's first foreign stop, but the COVID-19 pandemic turned the sit-down between the two leaders and some of their top deputies into a virtual affair. Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris and other officials, all wearing dark masks, sat at a long table in a White House meeting room, near a large video screen beaming in Trudeau's image from Ottawa. It was not clear the meeting would result in any new deal on issues including Canada's access to vaccines produced in the United States or a shared standoff with China over the detention of a Huawei executive. It is expected to yield a shared document outlining cross-government collaboration on a wide range of issues, a senior U.S. administration official told reporters. Biden irritated Ottawa shortly after taking office on January 20 by blocking the $8 billion Keystone XL pipeline project to pump oil sands crude from Alberta to Nebraska, and proposing a Buy American program aimed at directing more U.S. spending toward domestic manufacturers. But the two leaders made clear they wanted to put the dispute behind them and work together. Rekindled alliance. A Biden administration official said the U.S. president would raise the topic of the country's investment in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Trump often disparaged allies for their shortfall in funding the Mutual Defense Organization. Trudeau was the first world leader to congratulate Biden when the Democrat was declared the winner of the November election, illustrating the degree to which the close U.S. ally looks to move on from Trump's 4 years in office. The Republican former president, who often clashed with traditional allies on trade, imposed tariffs on Canadian aluminum and steel. He traveled only once to Canada for a G7 meeting in 2018, and blasted Trudeau for being very dishonest and weak after he left. Trump also forced the renegotiation of the North American Free Trade Agreement talks that consumed Trudeau's government for years. Tuesday's session began with a 45-minute meeting between Biden, Harris, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and their Canadian counterparts. An expanded meeting following that was expected to include a broader set of officials. Trudeau was accompanied by his finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, and others. Biden and Trudeau plan to address the public around 5:45 p.m., 2245 GMT. The U.S. official signaled little willingness to expand Canada's access to vaccines manufactured in the United States, saying Washington's focus is on vaccinating Americans. The official said the White House expected Trudeau to raise the issue of 2 Canadians detained by Beijing and charged with espionage after Canada's detention of Meng Wanzhou, chief financial officer of China's Huawei Technologies Company Limited, on a U.S. arrest warrant. The official said the White House believed the Canadians were unjustly detained and would work to secure their release, but added it would not meddle in independent Department of Justice matters. Meng remains under house arrest. Trudeau also wants Canada and the United States to collaborate more closely on manufacturing electric vehicles and supplying critical minerals needed to make batteries for cars and other clean technologies, Trudeau told Reuters earlier this month. Canada also seeks exemptions to a U.S. effort to ensure federal agencies buy American-produced goods. That could hurt Canada, given how tightly the two nations' economies are integrated. Exclusive, perfect trips. Venezuela ships jet fuel to Iran in exchange for gasoline, sources say. Caracas/Mexico City, Venezuela is shipping jet fuel to Iran in return for vital gasoline imports for the South American nation as part of a swap deal agreed by the two state-run oil firms. 3 people with knowledge of the matter told Reuters. Iran has ramped up assistance to Venezuela since last year as the United States tightened sanctions on both countries, hitting oil exports by state-run firms Petróleos de Venezuela and National Iranian Oil Company, NIOC. Iran has sent flotillas of state-operated tankers carrying gasoline and feedstock for motor fuel to Venezuela, as well as equipment and spare parts to help the once prosperous OPEC nation restart its dilapidated refineries. But the countries have provided few details on what Iran is getting from Venezuela in return. Iran's embassy in Caracas said in August that Venezuela had shipped a cargo of mangoes and pineapples to Iran as part of win-win commercial relations. Both Caracas and Tehran, which the United States has sanctioned with the aim of halting its nuclear program, have celebrated the Iranian fuel shipments as a method of resisting pressure from their common adversary. However, one of the sources said NIOC and PDVSA last year agreed to a full swap of Venezuela jet fuel to pay for the Iranian gasoline. The fuel swap suggests that Iranian fuel shipments to Venezuela, rather than a temporary expediency, could be sustained over the longer term. Jet fuel is now abundant in Venezuela due to a shutdown in most domestic air travel due to coronavirus-related restrictions. The jet fuel is shipped in the Iranian tankers that deliver gasoline to Venezuela in order to secure uninterrupted flow of refined products and take advantage of available tankers, the source said. Such deals are known as perfect trips in the maritime industry as vessels travel fully laden in both directions. Many independent tanker firms have been reluctant to carry Venezuelan oil or imported fuel for the country since Washington started sanctioning vessel owners. Each cargo is priced and compensated later. If there are differences in value between swap shipments, they are paid through future cargoes, the source added. Venezuela has used shipments of its Murray heavy crude to compensate Iran for shortfalls in the value of jet fuel exports, with at least one 1.9 million barrel cargo delivered to NIOC since October, according to the sources and PDVSA documents seen by Reuters. The mechanism has so far allowed the two state firms to dispatch cargoes in and out of Venezuela on board Iran-flagged vessels that have docked at the South American nation's ports at least 3 times since May 2020, according to Refinitiv Icon data. PDVSA is selling the Iranian gasoline in dollar-denominated prices at the pump, which has provided it with desperately needed hard currency for operations. It is unclear if Iran is using the Venezuelan jet fuel for domestic consumption or if cargoes are resold. Neither PDVSA nor Venezuela's oil ministry responded to requests for comment. NIOC and Iran's mission to the United Nations did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Perfect trips. In its most recent trip to Venezuela, the Iran-flagged tanker Fortune, managed by state-run National Iranian Tanker Company (NITC), loaded 250,000 barrels of Venezuelan jet fuel in early February at the eastern port of Puerto La Cruz after discharging about 300,000 barrels of Iranian gasoline, one person with knowledge of the shipment said. A third person with knowledge of the matter confirmed that both the Fortune and another Iran-owned tanker, the Faxon, which have made several trips from Iran's Bandar Abbas port to Puerto La Cruz between May and February, were full again upon their departure from South America, though the person did not know what product they had loaded with. NIT declined to comment. In addition to the jet fuel, Venezuela sent alumina to Iran aboard a cargo vessel that brought supplies for a supermarket in Caracas, as a years-long economic collapse has led to a humanitarian crisis in Venezuela. U.S. officials have said that Caracas is also paying Tehran with gold. Iran in February also resumed airlifts of catalysts to Venezuela to help PDVSA boost fuel output at its 1.3 million barrel per day refining network, which remains mostly idled. A portion of Iran's gasoline shipments was seized last year by the U.S. Department of Justice, exacerbating Venezuela's acute fuel scarcity. Italy repatriates ambassador and bodyguard killed in Congo. Goma, Democratic Republic of Congo. The bodies of Italy's ambassador to the Democratic Republic of Congo and his bodyguard arrived back in Rome on Tuesday aboard a military aircraft, a day after they were shot dead following an ambush in eastern Congo. Ambassador Luca Atanasio, 43, and his bodyguard Vittorio Iacovacci, 30, were killed while traveling in a United Nations World Food Programme convoy to visit a school feeding project. WFP driver Mustafa Milambo was also killed. Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi joined bereaved relatives as the plane carrying the coffins touched down at Rome's Ciampino airport, following the flight from the Congolese city of Goma, near the Rwandan border. According to Congo's presidency, the two-car convoy had been stopped on the road north from Goma by 6 armed men, who killed driver Milambo and led the 6 other passengers away. Army and park rangers tracked the group and a firefight ensued, during which the kidnappers shot the 2 Italians. Congo's Interior Ministry has blamed a Rwandan ethnic Hutu rebel militia called the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, FDLR, for the attack. The FDLR, one of around 120 armed groups operating in eastern Congo, denied responsibility for what it called a cowardly assassination. The FDLR declared that they are in no way involved in the attack, the group said in a statement. The local governor said that the assailants spoke the Rwandan language, Kinyarwanda. Rwandan rebels deny blame. The FDLR, founded by Rwandan former officers and militiamen who the United Nations and others blame for the 1994 genocide in Rwanda, has been blamed for previous kidnappings, including of 2 British tourists held for several days in May 2018. President Felix Tshisekedi dispatched his top diplomatic advisor to Goma to support an investigation by local authorities, and a Congolese envoy in Rome would present a letter from Tshisekedi to Italian President Sergio Mattarella, Congo's presidency said. Italian Carabinieri police investigators have flown into Congo for a brief mission to liaise with police there, an Italian source told Reuters. When they return home, Italian prosecutors will open a full investigation, the source said. Atanasio was the first ever Italian ambassador to be killed while in service. Dario Tedesco, an Italian volcanologist based in Goma, paid tribute to his slain friend. He was able to talk to all of us, completely different because he was adapting himself to each of us, making us feeling we were important, Tedesco said. He believed in what he was doing and this shouldn't have been his final journey. Israel sharing some COVID vaccines with Palestinians, Honduras, Czech Republic. Jerusalem, Israel said on Tuesday it was giving small amounts of surplus COVID-19 vaccines to Palestinian-run territories as well as to several countries. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu did not name which countries in a statement announcing the move. But the government of Guatemala, which opened its Israel embassy in Jerusalem last year, said it was expecting to receive 5,000 doses from Israel on Thursday. The government of Honduras, which said last year it intended to move its Israel embassy to Jerusalem, said it was expecting 5,000 doses from Israel. The country has yet to receive any doses. The Czech Republic said it had received a small Israeli shipment. The country in December said it would add a diplomatic presence to its Jerusalem office, a move short of opening a full embassy in the city. Israel has been importing Pfizer-BioNTech and Moderna incorporated vaccines. It has administered at least one Pfizer dose to almost 50% of its 9 million population in one of the world's swiftest campaigns. This month the Palestinians received an initial shipment of Moderna doses from Israel, helping kick off a limited vaccination program in the Israeli-occupied West Bank and Gaza. While Israel has been vaccinating Palestinians in East Jerusalem, it had come under foreign criticism for not extending its campaign to the other Palestinian areas. The vaccines due for Honduras will be administered to health workers at risk of exposure, and a Honduran Air Force plane is in Israel to transport them, government spokesman Carlos Madero said. The Central American country last year followed the United States in signaling its intention to move its embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, a diplomatic gain for Israel. Israel regards all of Jerusalem as its capital, although that is not recognized by most countries. Palestinians seek East Jerusalem, which Israel captured along with the West Bank and Gaza in the 1967 Middle East War, as the capital of a future independent state. The Czech Republic has received several thousand Moderna doses from Israel, Czech Foreign Minister Thomas Petrusek told reporters on Tuesday. The donation comes after the European Union country's president and premier sent letters to Israel requesting vaccine help. Some of Netanyahu's competitors in a March 23 election criticized the donations, saying the premier did not consult with the public or even his own cabinet before making them. Netanyahu thinks he is running a kingdom and not a state. Such a move requires discussion and approval, Benny Gantz, Netanyahu's centrist coalition partner and now election competitor, wrote on Twitter. In an interview with Israel's Army Radio, Finance Minister Israel Katz, a member of Netanyahu's right-wing Likud party, said he was unaware of the donations. Trump offered North Korea's Kim a ride home on Air Force One. Former President Trump made an unprecedented offer to North Korea's Kim Jong-un after the pair met in 2019 for their second summit in Hanoi, Vietnam, a ride home on Air Force One, which Kim declined, according to a top former U.S. official. Matthew Pottinger, a former deputy national security advisor who specialized in Asia policy, told the BBC that Trump made the offer after negotiations over North Korea's nuclear program ended at the February 2019 gathering with no significant progress. President Trump offered Kim a lift home on Air Force One. The president knew that Kim had arrived on a multi-day train ride through China into Hanoi, and the president said, "I can get you home in 2 hours if you want." Kim declined, Pottinger told the news agency. The offer, never before reported, constitutes the first time a North Korean leader or top official has been invited on the president's aircraft. Other former Trump administration officials detailed the unprecedented casualness of the conversations between Trump and Kim at the Hanoi summit and a previous summit in Singapore. Trump thought he had a new best friend, former National Security Advisor John Bolton told the BBC. The former president's summits with Kim and his visit to the demilitarized zone were seen at the time as the first real conversations between the U.S. and North Korea, but ultimately failed to spur any significant changes to U.S.-North Korean relations or the status of North Korea's missile program. Don't forget to comment below with your common sense and subscribe to your podcast. This helps bring the podcast to life and grow it. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We can't wait to continue this adventure with you. Support us on PayPal. Thank you very much and enjoy listening.